All right. So I don't know if this is going to work out or not. I am going for a walk, and I just wanted to talk about what nobody tells you about PhD research. And I think that this is really incredibly important. And yet nobody ever tells you this. This is like, people talk about like various different things like analytics and, doing math and things like that. But that's actually not the big issue or not the big thing that you end up doing. And I actually want to talk about that. So if you don't know me, I am Professor Dave Maslach. I'm an associate professor of innovation strategy and entrepreneurship, and I created this whole reciprocity project to give back as much as I possibly can. There's so many people that help me out that I want to pay the favor forward to help you out as much as I possibly can. So the biggest thing with PhD research that nobody ever tells you, it's not that there is like a lot of mathematics that's involved. There's not like that. There's definitely some of that goes on. There's not like there is a lot of reading involved. That's a huge part of it. That there is a lot of reading that goes on. There's the key thing that you have to remember with PhD research that you never really realize it is just how much of a writer that you have to be. And there's so much involved. There's so much writing involved. If you're not writing 5 to 10 pages a day, you're just not going to be cut out to doing PhD research. It is just an absolute grind, and you have to be constantly doing writing, and you have to sort of set these targets. And I had no idea coming into it when I started doing it is how much of writing that I would be doing every day. And in fact, if you talk to people that are sort of top scholars, they will never end to do any sort of analytical work. They'll never be doing any of that kind of stuff. But what they'll be doing is writing and thinking about, ideas. So the problem that this creates, though, and you see this a lot actually within research, is that it is pretty shallow because people sort of regurgitate the same sort of ideas over and over and over again, and you really don't make a heck of a lot of progress in what you're doing, where people are sort of talking across from each other and sort of building slightly on what other people are doing. But even still, what you don't realize is that the vast majority of very productive researchers, they tend to actually not read a lot of other people's research, which is really actually a strange phenomenon, because they're working and writing so much they don't have time to read other people's work. So they end up sort of just telling the things that they're saying and not really getting an in-depth understanding about the actual what other people are actually saying within the same area. And so you might be thinking, like, how do you actually do this? Well, a lot of researchers tend to do sort of superficial reading, where they kind of understand, one core area and then one core sort of thing, and then from that one particular core domain, you read what other people have done, and they kind of mimic what they did, or they look at the sort of one tiny aspect of what they did, and you begin to realize that a large number of people actually don't read other people's work. And it's somewhat problematic. It's somewhat of a challenge in terms of realizing this, but you have to kind of come to terms with that, because there's this target that you have to do. If you don't know, how we're measured is not by how much we analyze or what we are actually saying, but it's often to the extent of how much we're actually writing. So you could be writing a lot, and that's how you actually get measured, is writing as much as you possibly can, and then getting it through the review process. So how do you get journal articles through a review process? Well, you just have to write. If you saw a journal article, so in my field, in the strategy, organizational theory, innovation field, you might see an article that's 45 pages, 50 pages long. And that's kind of, I would say that's the norm. 30 to 50 pages is pretty normal. And you might be thinking, well, that's a lot of writing. What you don't understand is that behind those 30 to 50 pages is there's probably 350, 400 pages of work that people have written before to get through the review process. Because what you end up doing is writing your first paper. Well, you write it, the first draft, it's not that good. You scrap the whole thing, rewrite the entire draft again, and then you send it off to someplace. They will say, when in the review process, inevitably, if it's a good review process at a really rigorous journal, they'll inevitably say it sucks. And that's just the standard. They'll call it like a super high revision. And when they say it sucks, it'll mean like you have to redo everything. And you literally have to redo everything. And you'll have to do that again as you're doing that. But then you also have to respond to what they have written and write all of the stuff in terms of demonstrating what you actually have done and why the reasons why you've done those things. And so by the time you do this 2 or 3 times, you've written pages and pages, hundreds of pages, and you don't realize how onerous it actually is. And so you are really a creative in the sense that you're just writing things. You're more of a journalist than anything. You know how journalists, you might sort of imagine journalists have these tight deadlines and they're constantly writing as much as they can every day. And that's really what you're doing. And the people that sort of can do that very well and get their message across quicker and sooner have an easier process with that, right? So that's part of the reason, that was my whole struggle with, I had an interview with 7-person research group that I applied for a PhD. So why do you interview? So I might answer that in a minute. What I figured out is that I struggle with writing. I can write a lot, and I do write a lot, and I put a tremendous amount of effort in that. If you ever knew me in person, you know that I'm always working. As you could probably tell from this whole channel, right? Like I put in a tremendous amount of work, and this is only a small part of it, of my day, in terms of writing. So what I realized is that, well, what if I'm an engineer in my undergrad, and I always struggled with writing. I thought, well, what if I can create some sort of platform or something to help out many people like me? And so that's how I created the Reciprocity Project. It started out as a sharing economy editing platform to get feedback on your writing. I've actually been increasingly using it a lot more because it does help me write a lot, because what I'm doing is, as I'm doing my own thing, I'm trying to solve my own problems and sort of making it open to everybody to level the playing field, because I'm not the only one that has this experience. And so, the more that I build these things in, the better it actually gets. And it actually does work pretty well. And it's been really neat, because what I end up doing is using the sort of, tools that are in there, and then eventually sending it off to somebody to get feedback on it. And you kind of go through a couple of iterations, and it does help in terms of what you're doing. Not necessarily on the idea, and that's something that I need to work on, is how to get people to, work on the ideas, but it sort of works in terms of refining and, getting a straighter story across, which I think is super important. So, the struggles of this, the moral of the story is that when you do PhD research, it is just a lot of writing. And it's a ton of writing. It's a lot less analytical work than you'll ever think it is. And it's more of just grinding out writing every day. And anybody that tells you otherwise is not really they're not doing it. And they don't realize it. So coming back to, the question. So I can answer questions now if people have them. So one of them was, you have an interview with 7 different professors. I would read some of their work and get a sense of what they're doing, and then sort of have questions that are based on their work. I think that's going to be very helpful for you, because it's going to give you a sense of who these people are and the problems that they're working on, and see if you can sort of follow along. And if you can have comments and questions about, hey, I really like what you did. Do you think that you would do this? I think that would be really important to do that. How do you know you went well? I have no idea. It's a competitive market, and we'd never know. if you do well at a PhD interview, at any academic interview, you don't realize is that it is a competitive marketplace. When you apply, it's not just you, right? And so that means that you're being compared to everybody else. And so that competitive marketplace changes absolutely every year. It depends on the resources that are available in the program, but it also depends on who is applying and what is going on in the market conditions and all these other kind of things. Did another program reject them? All these kind of things that you would never think about. And so it's a really random process, as much as you would hope that it would be very linear. But it is a random process, and there's a tremendous amount of luck involved, particularly at the short term. So having everything look perfect is going to be really good. So if you have master's in research experience, it still doesn't matter. There's a lot of people that have the exact same thing, right? That means that you just are qualified to the extent that everybody else has. And so it's a random process. And you have to think of, you can't sort of give your hopes up. You just do the best you can. Try to do, address what they do and be nice. And then, it's up in the air. We all have to deal with this. This is part of the academic process. Trust me, everybody goes through this when they are in academia. It doesn't matter how much of a fancy schmancy professor or student they are or whatever, right? We all have to deal with this, and it's not a clear-cut process ever, in terms of getting to the end. And sometimes you just luck out and you get into a place, and sometimes you don't. And then you got to just keep working at it. And that's really it. That's why I stress so much on this channel that it's very much a sort of grinding process. If it doesn't work out, you try again. It doesn't work out, you try again. Rejection is academia. It's so I don't know how many of you would agree, but it is the central part of academia is rejection. If you look at the philosophy of science, it is called falsification is the process. And so what does that mean? That means that you are getting rejected all the time. People are trying to negate what you're doing, and that is built in to the scientific process. And it's a competitive game. The whole thing is competitive, and there's no right answers. And so you just put in your competitive bid, like as if you were doing project management, and you hope like you get it, just like everybody else does, right? If you were an engineer or something like that at an engineering firm. So if there's no other questions, I know that there's 7 of you that are here. I'm gonna duck out, and that's it. I just wanted to chat and say, it's very much you're a writer, and it's very much that you really need to get used to writing along the way. So no questions. I'm going to duck out. I'm going to count to 5 in my head, just to give you some insight. All right. So thanks so much. I appreciate the fact that you're here. I know many of you around the world watch this. It's an absolute pleasure to have you in my life. And maybe one day we'll bump into each other. One day you'll be able to pay the favor forward too. All right. Take care. Thanks so much, all. Have a good day. Enjoyed talking to you. All right. Take care. Bye-bye.